I'm based in Malaga, Spain. And as Ayako said, I'm going to give an overview of the work we've been doing here at the center for about the last 5 years in the course of 2 projects, one called MEET and one called DestiMED, and I'll explain all about them in a few minutes. So just to give you an introduction to me, as Ayako said, it's funny, I was just at another conference on Friday where we were talking about destination indicators for coastal tourism destinations in the Mediterranean. And I started to reflect that I've been working on these issues for quite a long time now in lots of different regions and lots of different ways, even though I'm now focused on the Med, even though I, before that, was working at, as I said, Sustainable Travel International, and I was one of the assessors for the first round of criteria and indicators that we developed for the GSTC destination criteria. And within the industry, I've also held other roles, working in private sector, running a tour operator and doing consulting for destinations. And now I'm here back at an NGO working at a regional scale. So let's say I've seen the industry from various different perspectives, and I've also seen let's say the application and usability of the GSTC criteria in many different ways, and continue to be a big believer in the importance of a universal set of criteria, but also with an understanding that regional context and situational context are really a critical piece of figuring out how to make them most relevant. So that's a little bit about who I am. And just an overview of what I'm going to share. So I'm going to start just a little bit broad. I have done in the past, when I was working for STI, a research study, me and a couple other people on the team, looking at destination management around the world and good practices within destination management models. And this was quite an extensive research study where we looked at several different, let's say, models and types of destinations and the way they were managing sustainability. And this is just a little bit of a synthesis of the good practices that we took from that study, just to share with you something big picture. And then I'm going to dive into the scale, let's say, that we're working at now, which is protected areas in the Mediterranean, and explain how we're applying the GSTC criteria here. So we'll start with the good practices. And the first thing that we learned from this research study was that destination management comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think this is really maybe a basic and obvious, but really, really important lesson. Because when we did our research, we didn't necessarily determine that there was one specific model or even one specific definition of a destination that necessarily made the most sense. In fact, we found that in each situation, there were very different models, and different models that were applied based on the context of the place. In some cases, very, let's say, formal management structures. In other cases, cooperation mechanisms that brought in lots of different stakeholders. In some cases, there were really sort of formal structures in place. In other cases, in some places, they were managing, let's say, very specific topics, and their mandate was very focused. And in other places, it was much broader. So I don't think that there's necessarily one model, but that what matters most is the regional, is sort of like the local context, and ensuring that the model that's adopted locally is going to make the most sense for the place and the situation. And we've really applied that to what we're doing here in the Mediterranean, where we're actually not doing a traditional destination management model here in the protected areas that we're working with. We've developed a new model for collaboration with private sector, and we've identified products as the primary, let's say, entry point for destination management. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that works later. So even though we found that there were lots of different models and there wasn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach, what we did find is that there were some, let's say, key themes that emerged from the organizations that we looked at that were defined as either good practices or methods for achieving success. The first one that we looked at was roles and responsibilities. So there we saw that you know, regardless of how the roles and responsibilities were actually structured, there were a few key things that were necessary for the stakeholders to be engaged in. One, creating a space for dialogue and collaboration. So that destination management was actually about this process of bringing together stakeholders and working through processes together in order to determine how to establish a common agenda around, let's say, utilizing resources to solve problems. That the destination management process, and especially utilizing something like a universal set of criteria, were often most useful for facilitating a strategy and planning process. And I've seen this come into play in many of the destinations I've worked with, where again, there's not always a common agenda. Private sector thinks one thing, the priorities of the public administration may be another, but utilizing a common set of criteria allows for facilitated strategy and planning process that leads to shared responsibility for product development, for managing a place, and for promoting tourism to the market. And then lastly, that no matter how destinations are structured, one of the critical aspects is ensuring that there is a system in place for monitoring, evaluating, and consistently improving. And again, I'm going to show how this plays out in the Mediterranean case study that we're currently engaged in. In terms of good governance, we also found a few key themes around strong vision and leadership, clear operational structures and processes for decision making, ensuring that all sectors are represented in the process, and providing the, let's say, incentive and mechanism, especially for private sector to be involved, and that the governance mechanism and even the planning and strategy process were flexible and adaptable to the local context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, now shift gears and talk a little bit about how some of these lessons learned have been applied to what we're doing here in the Mediterranean. So I want to back up and explain a little bit about the context of why it is that we're working on ecotourism development here in the Mediterranean, and particularly why my organization and others that we've partnered with are investing quite significantly in this work. And I should say also, this has been a big priority of the EU. You know, the project that we're currently working on is a €3 million project, and the project that preceded it was another 3 million. So we've seen quite a lot of investment in destination management from the supra-regional level, you know, from the EU funding mechanisms. And my organization, IUCN, is actually a conservation organization. So our mandate is quite simply the focus of conserving the Mediterranean basin in order to protect the rich biodiversity that exists here. And we work in ecotourism, and so do our partners like WWF and some other conservation-focused organizations, because we believe that ecotourism can be a positive driver of change and can contribute positively to the conservation of biodiversity, and especially to protected areas, which is a strategic line that we work on here at IUCN. But we know that in order for ecotourism to be successful, that we have to overcome a few key barriers. And when we did the analysis of let's say, all the destinations hosting ecotourism at protected area scale within the Mediterranean, we found out quickly a few things. So ecotourism is not necessarily a new model. People have been trying to implement ecotourism for a long time, but the approaches have been really fragmented, and the capacity has not really been there to deliver on ecotourism in a way that's thought of as, let's say, high quality and very sustainable. And so these projects have helped us to focus on a couple of key pillars, creating better governance mechanisms for protected areas and their partners at local scale, developing guidelines for what does it mean to develop a high quality ecotourism product, creating innovative tools for managing the impacts of tourism, both on the positive end, so the contribution to conservation, jobs, growth, etc., and of course on the negative side, mitigating or reducing the negative impacts on the environment, on the culture, etc. And tools to actually measure the quality and sustainability of the products that we're working on here in the protected areas. And then bringing together these protected areas into a, let's say, into a regional scale network through which they could, as a common voice, advocate for important policies, manage, let's say, a regional ecotourism strategy, but also promote and market Mediterranean ecotourism to the market, international market, under a common umbrella. So with that context in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the projects that we've implemented. The first one was called MEET. Again, that's the Mediterranean Experience of Ecotourism. It was a 3-year project from 2014 to 2016 that was funded by ENI, which is the European Neighborhood Initiative. ENI actually is a donor mechanism that requires that European countries work with their neighbors in exchange. So in our case, the Southern Med or Northern Africa was included as a significant chunk of the project. So we worked on 25 different protected areas in 8 countries, and you see them there. And the main focus of this project was to develop a common approach to ecotourism. So each protected area actually created and drafted a ecotourism package, which we tested a few different times with experts from around the world. And as a result of those tests, we did a couple of things. We developed a set of quality guidelines. I think maybe Ayako has shared the MEET manual with you guys. This was the outcome, the output of that project, was developing these common guidelines for ecotourism development in Mediterranean protected areas. And we established a regional network and brand called MEET, with the vision that this brand would ultimately come to the market. But as part of that brand, we developed a unique selling proposition, which you see there on the left. And that's the focus on tourism products based in and around protected areas, with local communities and providers, and creating a unique experience that supports conservation. A couple of really key things there. We've actually, as you'll see, that we've evolved the guidelines into a standard with requirements, and our, let's say, focus in order to deliver on our brand. We require the positive contribution to conservation. We require that the products that include protected areas as let's say a core component, and we are requiring that the money basically stays local and the experience stays local. And I'll show you how that plays out in a minute. Just quickly, we also, as part of the MEET brand that we developed, we wrote a set of core values. And what I like to say is that we've been demonstrating how tourism in the Mediterranean can evolve from the typical model of 3S, which is sun, sand, and sea, to 4Cs, which is a tourism model that's based on compassion, community, conservation, and connection. And these are also critical because now that we have a brand in place, we were able to design our standard partially as a way to make sure we were delivering on and responding to these values and this overall brand. One other thing I'll mention, because I think it's critical and really relates to Section A of the criteria around participatory planning and governance. We developed a model called Local Ecotourism Clusters, or LECs. maybe you've heard of in the past the term cluster in tourism. Typically it means a bunch of businesses all working together in a destination to design itineraries and to, let's say, market a destination together. In this case, we're talking about something a little bit different. The local cluster is a catalyst for cooperation between the protected area as the destination and, at the very least, an inbound tour operator who manages the logistics and operations of the packages that are being developed. So this is a mechanism for participatory planning and let's say, existing platform for decision making, for evaluating the packages that are being developed versus the criteria in the standard, and for consistently improving the quality and sustainability of the products that are existing within the destination. And so far, this has been a really successful mechanism. And in many cases, actually, the parks, we started to see them become broader stewardship councils where public sector is involved, where other local NGOs are involved, where other suppliers are involved, all working together to create a common vision and manage that common vision for ecotourism in a place. So I think one unique thing when just thinking about the GSTC criteria and how we're applying them here is that we are actually sort of merging two different concepts: destination management and the industry criteria, because we're working on destination management through the lens of working with private sector and developing products. So in the next section, you'll see how we have started to work on our standard and how we're incorporating both, components of both sets of criteria in the work that we're doing. So moving on to the second project, which is DestiMED. So DestiMED is, we call it the son or the daughter project of MEET. It was the let's say, the next generation and continuation of our work. We simply had to change the name because it was a new donor. So in this case, the Interreg, which is Interregional Cooperation Program of the EU for the Mediterranean. And in DestiMED, we're working in less protected areas, so only in 13, but across 6 countries: so Spain, Italy, France, Greece, Croatia, and Albania. And in DestiMED, we're more or less taking the work that we did within MEET and extending it further and crystallizing some of the concepts that I already shared with you about what we did during MEET. So the big focus here is on developing a standard for Mediterranean protected areas. And this standard really is designed to support the local ecotourism cluster in managing the packages from a quality and sustainability perspective, helping with selecting the right suppliers to participate, and improving the practices of those suppliers who are, let's say, part of the common vision and of the products that are being developed, and the alignment with the brand. So now that we have a brand and we have a clear, let's say, North Star for where we want to take these packages and these protected area destinations, we made sure that the criteria and indicators, in addition to being aligned with universal mechanisms like the GSTC, are also helping us to achieve the brand and the values that I shared with you earlier. So here you can see the pillars of the standard as we've developed them. The very first, let's say, foundational pillar is what we call enabling conditions. And these are all yes/no criteria, absolute requirements for being part of our project and later part of the portfolio that we're developing. And those are requirements around the formation and operational structure of the local economic or local ecotourism cluster, and the basic conditions of having a product, that they are written to be experiential, written to focus on the protected area, and written to incorporate conservation, because that's the unique selling proposition of these products. Then we have we call our sustainability section, which I know is a vague term, but that's where you see a lot of it's where we've integrated a lot of the, say, traditional sustainability criteria around socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental impact. On the environment side, we're looking at two different areas, and this actually is how the GSTC criteria are also structured. There's bits about resource use and impact on the environment, and other bits about conservation and ensuring, let's say, the protection of biodiversity and flora and fauna. Here we've also incorporated quality criteria, which I think is really interesting for us. It's been a big lesson learned in order to, number one, get private sector's buy-in and participation. We've added criteria that help them improve, let's say, the work that they care about the most, which is delivering a quality experience to travelers. And this is actually the method of verification for this is all feedback from customers based on the quality of the transportation, activities, accommodation, and guides or tour leaders, people that are involved in the package. And then around supplier expectations, we have more sort of traditional criteria here that you see in the socioeconomic section of the GSTC criteria around local ownership and fair and equal employment practices. One other thing I'll share about the environment piece. So what we've done that I think is innovative in looking at the environment side, we've partnered with an organization called Global Footprint Network. I'm sure you've heard of the carbon footprint methodology, or the carbon footprint numbers. And so in this case, what we're doing is applying the carbon footprint methodology to ecotourism for the first time. So we are working with them to test this methodology right now, but we've been really happy with the way it looks. So in each destination, we're now able to assess the impact of tourism on, let's say, the biocapacity or the resources of the protected area and its communities. And what this does that's really nice is it actually gives the destinations a number, a quantifiable measurement of the footprint of tourism on the place. And right now we're still benchmarking, but the long-term vision is to be able to demonstrate that number one, that ecotourism and sustainable forms of tourism have a lower footprint than mass tourism, even though we feel that we know that in our heads. It's nice to be able to have data to back it up. And then secondly, to be able to help each protected area understand what is its threshold for the footprint, and how can it reduce its the footprint of the tourism products by improving the scores of the accommodations, the activities, and the transport. And one of the actually biggest categories is around food, and how food is consumed and where food is brought in from and that sort of thing. So the nice thing about this is it gives us a really quantifiable, let's say, way to respond for the local ecotourism clusters to respond and create interventions for their improvement plans. And we're putting all of this into a monitoring dashboard. We'll see all the criteria in one place, and each of the destinations, this is another good practice that I've learned over the years. Destinations need data crunched in let's say, a really easy to use way. And so we're giving them a dashboard with traffic light system where they can manage their performance on specific indicators over time, and quickly identify what are the highest priority things to be working on. And just to show here the alignment to GSTC, I think I've mentioned quite a lot of these, but when I did this analysis of how our standard is structured and how it fits with the GSTC criteria, I noticed that, as I said, we are right now managing destinations, but with the lens of products. So the whole top section, you can see that we're quite aligned to several criteria from section A and B, although I'd say we have a little bit of a ways to go on the destination side, looking at things in a bit more of a holistic and broad way. But when you look at private sector and their, let's say, interest and desire in meeting industry criteria, I noticed in Section A and particularly B that we've incorporated practically all of Section B into our standard. So the destination is actually, in this case, responsible for helping the private sector respond to the industry criteria and ensure that the products that are being promoted eventually into the market will, at minimum, be responding to those criteria, and all the suppliers who are participating will be compliant. So that's really good to see. And let's see, I'm going to wrap up with lessons learned from our process, just as it relates to destination management and these criteria. I think I've said it a few times, but I can't stress enough the importance of the participatory process. To me, the standard and the cluster and all these other things, it's about creating a participatory process that really works. When you have, again, common tools and common frameworks and criteria to be used for this kind of decision making, it really enhances the participatory process. And what we've also seen is that there are other participatory processes in place. We work with parks, and many of them already have the European Charter for Sustainable Tourism, which is another governance process. But by building this around product, around very specific like market entry points, we've seen that they further operationalize these park processes because they have something very clear and specific to be involved in. Private sector engagement, I said it before, I'll say it again. In this case, there is a lot of incentive to participate because, again, we're developing products and there's some long-term vision for the market. I was really surprised when we developed the methodology for the ecological footprints. We actually are requiring all of our suppliers to give quite a lot of information. Around their energy use, around waste, around food consumption, around all their environmental practices. And I was really skeptical that private sector would be forthcoming with all of that information. And I've been really pleasantly surprised. We've had no issues at all because we feel that private sector in this case is engaged and involved, feels as if they're part of the process. And here they are really contributing and being transparent about their practices and wanting to learn, which is not something I've seen in other, let's say, play out in other destinations very well. We have developed this whole process a bit piecemeal, and we've actually learned a lot along the way that systems like this and mechanisms for planning can be practical and can evolve. I don't think they need to be perfect right away, and I think we're all continuing to learn. We had this discussion the other day in the conference I was at, that even around the criteria and indicators at global and regional level, and especially how they're being applied and how we use data and how we reorganize destinations to respond to this data. It's a process that we're all learning from, and we shouldn't be paralyzed by mistakes or challenges. It should just help us keep going. And lastly, for us, as I said, in this particular case study, these products are providing destinations and their stakeholders with a really tangible way to operationalize their destination management strategies. And what's great, I think, is that we're seeing it play out and expand beyond the work we're doing. So many of the parks that we're working with are now tackling other destination management challenges beyond the products because they have a good cooperation. So they're looking now more broadly, and I think it's important because a product can't exist in isolation from a destination and its unique challenges. But they're using this process as a catalyst to solve their bigger challenges and issues. And just one slide related to the challenges that you all shared. So you guys had provided in your survey before the course what some of the challenges that you were really worried about. And I took a look at those, and for me it's just clear that destination management, good governance, responding to these criteria can really be a catalyst for motivating and engaging stakeholders. And I think stakeholders in destinations are looking for wanting to be involved. They're wanting more information. They're wanting to know what is the destination doing, what can their role be, and by putting these practices into place and by using these, let's say, common frameworks, what we've seen really a significant uptick in participation and motivation. And finally, I just want to share with you that we have a long-term vision for this work. In fact, just a month ago or so, we formalized the establishment of MEET as a network association here in the Mediterranean. And this gives us an opportunity to take the work beyond the projects that we've implemented thus far. And so MEET is now an NGO, a nonprofit network, which is an association of parks and other partners who are working together to promote this model of ecotourism. And what's cool about this is that we're also now, through this association, able to manage the same criteria and the same, let's say, participatory process at regional scale. So we're rolling up the data that comes from what each of the destinations are doing, and we're able to look at let's say at an ecosystem level across the Mediterranean about issues, bring people together to advocate for better policies. And we're also establishing, we're about to finalize actually a partnership with the commercial entity who will sell the best products on the market. And so that's a little bit of the vision for where we're going and how we continue to, we'll continue through this association to develop tools and build the capacity of our constituency through alignment with GSTC and other partners to ensure that we're building and managing successful ecotourism destinations around the region. And I think with that, I'm going to stop.
Thanks, Jeremy, for your great presentation. We're already starting to share some good questions here in the chat. I wanted to maybe start with one question regarding the MEET network and DestiMED. Could you perhaps share an example of a destination where you would say many of the criteria met, or perhaps a destination that you might say is a good example representing what you've discussed? And maybe tell us a bit on maybe the scale of the destination, how big or small it is, and so on.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of let me see, there's a couple of questions there. I mean, in terms of scale, we are working at protected area scale. So it's always interesting how you define destinations, and in this case, the protected areas that we were working with range from pretty small to quite large ones, but they are still protected areas, and they still exist even within the context of other destinations. But in most cases, we are actually working in pretty small places because these are parks. Some of them are national parks, and some of them are small marine protected areas, but they are parks. And what we consider is that the working with parks obviously gives us a chance from a conservation point of view to work on mechanisms that protect a specific space, but also it can be a bit of a laboratory for scaling up broader destination strategies and that kind of thing, because it gives us a more, let's say, tight focus where we can hopefully scale it up into bigger places. So just a note on the scale. But let's see, I can give you a couple really good examples. The one that first comes to mind is Samaria National Park, which is in Crete, in Greece. So they have an excellent, let's say, local economic or local ecotourism cluster mechanism in place, and they participated in both projects. So they've now gone through 4 rounds of testing, and they're pretty regularly scoring very high in all of the areas, and they've been able to tap. What's nice is that they weren't great at first, and we've seen them improve over time, and they've been able to tackle bits of the criteria and at once and improve and then move on to something else. So for example, they've really honed their participatory planning. They've honed the basic structure of the products and how they respond to sustainability criteria. Now they're working on improving and reducing their ecological footprint. So we've seen them sort of tackle those things and move on to other challenges. Another one that I think has been a really good example is Colline Metallifere. I can share this later if you want, but they're a UNESCO geopark in Tuscany. And they are an example of a destination that already has, because they are UNESCO and they have the European Charter for Sustainable Tourism, they have already in place this mechanism for collaboration, and it's been something they've worked on for several years. So when it comes time to developing a product and responding to it, it's been it's been a challenge for them, but it's been easy because they have a lot of the, let's say, Section A stuff really well in place, and they have the ethos for how they manage sustainability in the park already in place. We also work with destinations who are really just starting. They've never worked together with private sector. They've never managed tourism before. And so for them, I've seen a tremendous amount of improvement, but they're starting from a different point.
Great. I wanted to mention, I came across, I think in one of your social media updates, there was a recent article by WWF, which you mentioned is one of the partners that you work with on the national park example in Crete,
yep.
In Greece, which I thought was a really nice presentation of what's going on, and I'd be happy to share this with the class as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that came from our project, so
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have next questions, two questions related to I think the local economic clusters. One is within the groups, do they face the challenge of businesses, tour operators competing with each other as opposed to collaborating?
Sorry, can you say it again?
The local economic clusters, do they face the challenge of local businesses, tour operators competing with each other as opposed to collaborating on the destination development?
Yeah. Not really, actually. I mean, because the way these have been designed, and I'm seeing another question. I think it kind of relates around how many stakeholders and whether it's more challenging to conduct a participatory process. I think these are actually related. What we've actually seen is that the more stakeholders that are involved, the better the participatory process is, because there's more voices in creating a common vision. Maybe it seems counterintuitive, and it's not easy. It needs to be really well facilitated. But what we've seen is that the more voices there are at the table that are using a common framework for decision making, the better the decision making is. And in this particular case, we haven't actually limited the number of suppliers and operators that can be involved in the process. So we've actually encouraged the parks to bring in lots of different stakeholders from private sector to be involved in creating this common vision. And if they are interested in creating lots more products, then great. They can do in our projects. I mean, within the scope of the budget that we have, we've asked them to create one package, but we've seen for example, in Delta del Ebro in Catalonia, where we're working, that they're often creating all kinds of new products using the same framework. And so it can be inclusive. And what we've actually found is that there are some operators for whom this is not a good fit. In fact, we've had some drop out of the process and say, I actually have my business and it's going really well and it's built around mass tourism, and I don't want to be involved in this because it's a lot of work, and that's okay. I mean, we can't encourage and impel everyone to take on this kind of a collaboration. So I guess in this case, on the one hand, a lot of participation has actually just allowed for more robust decision making and product development. On the other hand, if there is any competition, it is a little bit healthy, I think, because the protected areas are the ones in the driver's seat, essentially saying, this is the threshold that we're setting, and this is the bar that we're creating for being a part of our, let's say, our vision for tourism and the way we plan to manage this locally. And this is what we're expecting from suppliers who are going to be a part of the process. And what we've seen is, in some cases, a little bit of healthy competition around good practices and stuff like that, but not in terms of competing with each other for business. But again, in most cases, I'd say we are working in lesser developed destinations where there's not, this is not being done in Barcelona with thousands of destinations, or this is in lesser developed destinations where maybe there aren't so many suppliers. So in this particular example, that's how it's played out. I could see it being very different in a different place. We'd need to maybe rethink the process for a destination with a different context.
Right. Great. Thanks for addressing that. And this other question from Sarah: are there any examples on how MEAD and the network and the clusters have helped operators within the destinations to help and maintain quality experiences?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yes, our project has been all about training and capacity building. So we've had the luxury of having a large budget to do that very thing. And we've brought in several experts to do that. But actually, the best approach that we've used is through testing. So we have, as I think I mentioned in the beginning, we've created a bit of a sandbox for product development. So the destinations draft their package and put together a small test where they bring in experts who give them feedback on all of those things, on the activities, on the accommodation, on the overall sort of flow and professionalism of the package. And these aren't fam trips, they're not designed to sell. They're designed to get help and to get feedback. And it's a great model. In fact, we find, because we have expertise within our project team, and we often give them feedback when we see their initial itineraries and stuff like that. And the operators are usually a little bit defensive until we run the tests and they get lots of feedback, and then they become suddenly very open to everyone's ideas. And so, but it's been really effective. So in the MEAT network, which we're carrying forward, we intend to replicate this model, where we'll have a selection of testers who understand the market and who understand ecotourism development, and who can really be, let's say, people who help to evaluate and respond to the criteria that we've developed. And they are the ones who go there and really provide feedback and provide coaching and provide this kind of support. But MEAT as an association intends to focus very heavily on this kind of, in addition to the tests, also training and capacity building. And what I see at regional scales, where we can identify, for example, gosh, the interpretation criteria is really missing across the board. Great, let's identify some good practices in that, and let's find people who can come in and do some on the spot training for our destinations to help them improve in that area. So it really helps us to roll up the data into something useful. And I think the parks really appreciate when they see their own priorities come back to them in the form of training.
Yeah, that's really great to hear that training and capacity building is used as a way to really address the needs on an ongoing basis as they come. Just on the testing example that you mentioned, I know that there was a call for experts. Is this for this year? This is already closed. Is that correct?
For the spring, but we'll have another round in the fall. Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you who might be interested, because I know that there are a lot of expertise represented in this group as well, and depending on where you are in the world, for some of you, it may be relevant. So if you, I do encourage you to follow the MEAT network on social media and so on. But one of the updates that you will see in the future might be on the testing, and then maybe that might be actually relevant. And moving on to, I think the process of developing the criteria for meat. What did you find were the biggest challenges when engaging with destinations, businesses, and communities during the development process?
Yeah, good question. I think our biggest struggle, there's maybe two things that come to mind. The first one was really trying to make sure that what we're developing is relevant and useful. I have worked, as I said, I've worked in this space for quite a while, and the last thing that we wanted to do is develop yet another thing that people, that we develop in a project and then we use money on, and then people aren't going to use. And so we've had a working group all along of, let's say, the main stakeholders who have been involved in really pushing us on what are we including and why, and how are we going to actually use this information. And we've really tried to listen, and sometimes we confuse them. We give them too much stuff, or what we give them they feel isn't useful, and we're just really trying to avoid that, because I think it's been a flaw of several other processes that I've seen, and we're getting a lot of feedback on that, and it's helped us refine and try to be as practical as we possibly can. And then I think the other challenge, especially from businesses, it's a bit what I alluded to before, but some operators in particular, or businesses involved who are already um, doing pretty well with their businesses and not necessarily buying into the vision, like wanting to see what's the return on investment. It's actually it's a decent amount of work, although we've tried to make it practical and relevant. But, in order to report and have data and all this stuff, it requires resources. And it's the same with the parks. What is the level of resource that's going to be required to do this, and how does it pay off in the end? A big part of that has been solved by just identifying the right ones who have a commitment, who have the vision. Same thing with at the supplier level, getting those who for whom it fits. And in fact, it doesn't fit for everybody, and that's been a lesson. We can't just sort of enforce one particular framework and model on everyone. So in that case, we've partially really trying to show that there is let's say a return on investment. In this case, we have very specific products and a portfolio and a market strategy. But that market strategy is very long term. And in fact, big mistake we made at the beginning. In the first year, we told the parks that, by the end of the year one, you should expect to have some products that are ready for the market. And that was just a big mistake, because it was not something that we could feasibly deliver on. Both because it takes scale and also because it takes time to do it right. And we're very fortunate we had years of investment to get it right. And we will continue to, because we have lots of commitment to this work. But I think it actually requires that level of sort of continued improvement and not rushing to the market in this case, or making promises that can't be kept without the resources. So we've learned to sort of tamp down the expectations and have everyone looking toward the long-term vision. But for private sector, that can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah. That's actually a really important and interesting point, because one of the things that I wanted to mention is that as with the previous course, this group is also working on a group exercise that focuses on product development, with the scenario of an island destination, maybe in the Mediterranean.
Great.
Trying to build diversify its tourism offerings by building additional products, and perhaps sort of the scale as well as the time scale of when that happens and when it can be marketable, and what do you need to do in the process. I think that's also a really relevant lesson for us in our group, in our exercise, to think about. It's not sort of build it and they will come, but that you need to be able to be producing attractive products that
that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we lose sometimes in all the work in sustainable tourism. I'm glad you guys are working on that too, because I feel like sometimes we lose that. Like, what are we actually doing here? Is we're, tourism is a product that is, and a service that is sold on the market and has the expectations of the market, and we have to, we can't lose sight of that while staking a claim for what we expect from our, let's say, suppliers and partners who are working on this stuff. So figuring out how to incorporate all of this thinking around product in the market for me was a critical step to make all of this real.
Yeah. Can you tell us, as a last question, in terms of the product development aspects of the project, who are the target audience? Who are the travelers that are being targeted, and how are they reflected in product development?
Yeah, great. We actually, the target audience that we're focusing on is the experiential traveler, also called soft adventure, cultural traveler. There's lots of different definitions. We landed on experiential traveler. I have a whole slide. I didn't include it, but it's that traveler who prioritizes experience over things, who is willing to spend between 150 and 300 a day on travel, but would prioritize that budget toward experiences and activities and engaging interactions with people versus luxury hotels and accommodations. And it's not budget travel, so it's somewhere in the middle. Anyway, I can send you all that. We did some research on it, but we designed, to your point, we designed the entire standard with this group in mind. So when you look at the quality expectation specifically, we looked at what that market would expect, and we designed the criteria to respond to the kinds of activities, accommodations, et cetera, that they would expect from a high quality product. So the criteria, especially in the quality section, are written to respond to their needs, so that the operators know how to develop a product that meets the needs of that market. Otherwise it's too disconnected.
Right, exactly, and that's also part of our exercise. And each group from our class has a specific market that they're focusing on. But obviously, this being a sustainable tourism course, the experiential group and sort of like as you mentioned, the soft travel, soft adventure, and sort of those that are seeking types of experiences that we would like to promote as sustainable tourism providers are the ones that are really close to what we're focusing on. So it would be really great to see, as you said, additional information on the target audience. That would be, I think, helpful for our group as well.
My just one more comment. My dream has always been, from the sustainability side, is to really link quality and sustainability in such a way that, certainly I think our destination management organizations should be looking at this as in an integrated way, and unfortunately we still see a lot of fragmentation in the way things are structured, but wouldn't it be nice if we could demonstrate that as the sustainability rises, that the quality also rises, and that's something that we are trying to do by integrating that into this criteria, because for me that's a way to continue to, let's say, state the case for sustainable tourism. So we really have this in mind as part of the vision that we're implementing here.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, and I definitely agree, and I think that's part of I think what we want to learn through this course as well, for us to be able to make that case, and I think we're really in our sustainable tourism communities and networks. I think we're really beyond what is sustainable tourism, and we're really getting to sort of the levels of discussions where we're really looking at how can sustainable tourism be more real and be more attractive. And
yeah, I agree. I'm glad we reached this point.
Yeah.
it's a good evolution for our sector. So
great. Yeah, and thanks in part due to great work that people are doing, such as yourself, Jeremy.
Thanks.
So, thanks again for this excellent presentation. and for this great, interesting session. We've learned so much, and to have this opportunity to learn directly from you is always a great pleasure. So thank you again, Jeremy.
Well, it's my pleasure. Here, I'm putting my contact info in the
Great.
chat, so if anyone wants to reach out, please feel free.
Great, and we'll share the slides as well as any additional related information that we can share afterwards. So
Okay.
thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Jeremy. And for our class, we will see hopefully many of you again on Thursday. And again, great session. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thanks guys. Thanks
Bye,
for having me.
everyone.
Okay. Adios.